Hello everyone and welcome to Virtual Autumnfest. My name is Elaine Mills and I'm one of the coordinators at Glencarlyn Library Community Garden. It's one of the Master Gardener demonstration gardens in Arlington. Normally in September, we'd be welcoming you to a wonderful festival for Autumnfest. We'd be having vendors and various booths in the parking lot. In the back, we'd have exhibits, food for you to taste, beverages to try, and we'd be taking you on tours around the garden and then inviting you into the library for some educational presentations. Because that doesn't happen this year, we're doing a number of video presentations, our virtual Autumn Fest. This particular video is on identifying plants. Master gardeners are quite often asked to help members of the public identify plants. And they usually do that when the plants are brought to them at the various plant clinics that we hold throughout Arlington and Alexandria. Since that isn't possible this year, I thought I would invite you to my personal garden, take you on a tour, and show you some characteristics of plants, some techniques for photographing them that might help you if you want to send your questions to the Extension Master Gardener Help Desk. The email address for the Help Desk is MG for Master Gardener, ARL for Arlington, ALEX for Alexandria @gmail.com. The first thing you'll want to do when attempting to identify a plant, what you might think of as a mystery plant, is to determine what category it belongs to. Is it a woody plant, a fern, maybe a grass-like plant, or a non-woody herbaceous plant? So let's start the tour with some woody plants. And by woody plants, I mean trees, shrubs, and vines. Woody plants have a thick outer coating, like this bark here. And the bark of this particular tree has what are referred to as ridges and furrows. It's very characteristic. This is the bark of a native tree, the native red maple. For comparison, let's go look at another tree. For comparison, let's look at this non-native hornbeam tree. It has interesting striations to the bark, but it's relatively smooth. Sometimes bark will be smoother when it's young, and then will develop those characteristic patterns of ridges and furrows when it gets older. Bark can come in many different colors. It can be brown, gray, almost black, and sometimes red or orange. A couple of native trees that come to mind that have distinctly different bark are the American beech. Our local naturalist, Alonzo Abugadas, refers to that tree as an elephant's foot. It has a very smooth gray bark to it. On the other end of the spectrum, we have another native tree, the shagbark hickory, where bark actually peels off in big wide strips. Here's a native shrub with a very interesting bark. It's called the nine bark, and you'll see as we pan the camera that it has an exfoliating bark. The bark peels away in layers. Some other examples of trees with exfoliating bark are our native river birch, the American sycamore, which has almost a camouflage pattern to its bark, and non-native crepe myrtle as well. The final type of woody plant are vines. And here's a lovely native example. This is coral or trumpet honeysuckle, a great replacement for the invasive Japanese honeysuckle. Vines can have very flexible shoots, as you can see here, and you might also want to note any fruits or flowers that are on these plants as you're describing their categories and characteristics and taking photographs of them. The other thing to point out is that, like the other woody plants, it has rough bark. Another characteristic of bark that you might look out for is these raised pores, which are referred to as lenticels. You'll see these on some trees and some shrubs. Some will be much more noticeable than others, and they can come in different shapes. The purpose of these pores is for gas exchange through the bark. Something else to note here with this particular shrub is that it is fruiting right now. This is a winterberry holly, a lovely native holly. And the fruit right now is green. It's round in shape. The fruit is referred to as drupes, by the way. This fruit is green now, almost in September, but as the season goes on, it will be turning a bright red, and it will remain on the plant into the winter, providing wonderful nutrition for our birds. The second major category of plants we'll be looking at in the garden are the Graminoids. This is a category that refers to the grasses and other grass-like plants, the sedges and the rushes. There are a couple of characteristics of those plants. They have parallel veins to their leaves. The very first leaves, the seed leaves, are single. That's how they get the name monocots. They're monocotyledon. The stems are jointed, as you can see right here, and they have flowers that are very different than those of the herbaceous plants. They don't have very distinct separate petals, and the flowers are referred to as inflorescences. This particular plant that we're looking at right now is one of my favorites. It's a warm season grass, pink muley grass, and this inflorescence is just beginning to form now, but as the season moves on, it will begin to open up. You can just barely see it here, and this will catch the light and look almost like children's sparklers. Absolutely beautiful. Another of my favorite native grasses is switchgrass, Panicum virgatum, and the wider leaves here show a perfect example of those parallel veins I was speaking about that are characteristic of the monocots. Panicum virgatum, the switchgrass, has very airy inflorescences, very characteristic. It comes in many different cultivars, and the leaves and the flowers may be slightly different in color, but this is the characteristic airy look. And this is one of the things I love about the grasses and why I include them in my garden. The stems are very flexible, they can catch the breeze, and they create a lot of movement, bringing the garden to life. This grass here in front got a little bit beaten down by the last big rainstorm. This is little blue stem, and this will turn a lovely tawny, rusty color as the season moves on, and the inflorescences will open up. You can just barely see them right here, and they will be little white, silvery white plumes that will catch the light. Two other interesting and very different seed heads are right here. These are river oats, and you can see why they're so named, because of these oat-like seed heads. And this one, appropriately enough, is called bottlebrush grass. Okay, the second type of plant in the Graminoid group are the sedges. And you may be familiar with the mnemonic poem, sedges have edges, rushes are round, grasses are hollow, right down to the ground. Now, you won't be able to see it as clearly as I would like, but I can definitely feel the triangular edges of this particular sedge. This is a wonderful native sedge, gray sedge. And the way you can tell that that's what it is because of these incredible inflorescences. They're green right here, and as the season goes on, they turn brown and dry. And if these were to drop off, this plant normally grows in a wetland area. If these were to drop off, they would actually be carried away by the stream and then reproduce further down. Now, this plant is not a desirable sedge. This is the weedy plant nut sedge, but you may be able to see the triangular stem a little bit more clearly here. I will twist it around. Another point to make to distinguish the grasses, sedges, and rushes is that both grasses and rushes have round stems, but the stems of the grasses are hollow and the stems of the rushes are pith-filled. Unfortunately, I don't have one of them to show you. One other thing that I would like to show is this lovely close-up of a leaf. This is from plantain leaf sedge, and you can distinctly see those parallel veins I've been speaking about. And this crinkled quality to the leaf of this plant gives it its second common name, seersucker sedge. Continuing our tour, we'll take a look at some ferns. This particular fern is a non-native fern, autumn fern. Now, ferns are different from the other plants we've looked at. They don't have flowers, and therefore they don't have seeds. They produce in a different manner. Some of them have spore-bearing structures on the reverse sides of their fronds, and these are referred to as sori, S-O-R-I. And the arrangement of the sori on the reverse side of the fronds can help you tell the difference between them. This frond, for example, has sori arranged in a very different manner. They're lined up along the edges of the pinnae, the little individual leaflets of the frond. And that gives this frond its name, marginal wood fern. This is a native fern. Sometimes the spores will be located over the entire leaflet, but maybe not down the entire length of the frond. This particular example is Christmas fern. And some interesting things to point out are, of course, the differences in the leaflet structure between these three different ferns. Christmas fern gets its name for several reasons. One is the very distinctive shape of the pinnae, the little individual leaflets that are said to look something like Christmas stockings. Another reason would be that this is an evergreen fern. It has leathery leaves that allow it to last well into the winter time. And that's also a characteristic of the marginal wood fern. The last category of plant that you may want to identify are the herbaceous plants. These are non-woody flowering plants. They can be annual or perennial. In my garden, I mainly grow perennials. Those are plants that will die back at the end of the season. They won't remain the way the woody plants do, giving architectural structure to the garden through the winter, but they will come back again the next year. Now, with the herbaceous plants, you'll want to look more closely at several different characteristics. You'll want to look at the stems, the leaves, and the flowers. So starting to look at the stems, this example of beard tongue right here shows you how you can have very smooth, round stems. This purple coneflower, echinacea, has round stems, but they have a rougher characteristic to them. And in fact, stems like this rudbeckia can be very hairy. Stems can also take different shapes. This example right here is a square stem that's characteristic of plants in the mint family. As you're looking at the stems, you'll also want to note the arrangement of the leaves on the stems. This penstemon is a great example of opposite leaves. You can see how they're directly opposite each other here and there, going down the stem. This eastern blue star is an example of alternate leaves. They're on opposite sides, different sides of the stem, not directly opposite each other. Leaves can also appear on a stem in a whorled arrangement, as in this candy tuft and Joe Pye. All the leaves are coming out at the same height, all the way around the stem. And the interesting thing about this Joe Pye to point out is that the stem has a different purplish color, and there can be distinctions between the different Joe Pye species based on the way the stems look. One final arrangement of leaves is actually not on the stem itself, but at the base of the stem. This is an example, this is lyre leaf sage, an example of basal leaves, B-A-S-A-L, and this is referred to as a basal rosette of leaves. One other type of leaf to point out is these feathery leaves. These are Coreopsis. We've talked about the arrangement of leaves on stems or at the base of stems. Now let's take a closer look at the leaves themselves. They can either be single leaves, like this one. I happened to pull this one from my black gum tree this morning. Or they can be compound, where different leaflets are formed all on the same stem. This example is wild strawberry, columbine, yarrow with very fine, almost fern-like divisions. And this one is Virginia creeper. This particular arrangement of the leaflets is said to be palmate because the leaves look almost like the 5 fingers of a hand. Leaves can also be lobed. This example is a cultivar of a sweet gum. I wish I'd purchased the straight species, which has a more star-like arrangement. Now, lobes can be round, like this one is, or they can have sharper edges. This is tulip poplar, maple, oak leaf hydrangea, and the lobes of the oaks can help you differentiate different oak families. The sharper, more pointed lobes are characteristic of the red oaks. The white oaks have more rounded lobes. And this is the post oak with an interesting cross shape to the leaves. Now, these 3 leaves look different, but they were actually all chosen from the same plant, the native sassafras tree. Some of the leaves are completely oval in shape. Some have a single lobe, a mitten-like shape, and some have a double mitten. Leaves can also be dissected. This is an example of wild geranium, where the cuts into the leaves are even much deeper than those of the lobes, but they're not separated into separate leaflets. And finally, you can look at the edges of leaves. And this example right here shows a very smooth edge to the leaf. This is eastern redbud. This leaf is from black chokeberry, and you can see that it's slightly serrated. And finally, this leaf has a definite tooth to the edge, and that actually gives that particular plant its scientific name. The common name of that viburnum is arrowwood, but its scientific name is Viburnum dentatum. We've discussed the fact that herbaceous plants are flowering plants and that their petals are often in multiples of 4 or 5. And this plant, this lovely native plant, is a wonderful example. This is the native red hibiscus. It's a single flower, just on a single stem. Now, flowers can sometimes be more complex, and I wonder if you can see that all of these flowers, as slightly different as they appear, are actually similar in one important way. All of these flowers are examples of composites, members of the aster family. And the reason why they're called composites is that the flowers are divided into 2 different parts. There is the central part of flowers, this cluster right here, referred to as the disc flowers. And then these longer petals outside are referred to as the ray flowers. So each one of these flowers has that arrangement. This particular plant is green and gold. This one is a native oxeye sunflower. This one is doll's daisy, Boltonia. And this one is probably the most familiar to people. This is the purple coneflower, Echinacea. And this is perhaps the best example of a composite flower with a very prominent central cone and then the rays going off to the sides. I'd also like to quickly mention that flowers can have different shapes. This one is a very complex tiered flower. This is Monarda punctata, spotted bee balm, and you can see the spots on this particular set of petals. Flowers can be said to be lipped. They can have a little protrusion down from the hooded part of the flower. And finally, flowers can be tubular in shape, like this trumpet honeysuckle. One last thing to note about flowers is the way they're arranged on the stems. These delicate flowers here are from wreath goldenrod, and they're arranged all along the stem. These flowers are held together in a cluster. This is New York ironweed, lovely pollinator plant. Another type of cluster is this arrangement that you see on the wild hydrangea. Flowers can be arranged in spires or stalks. This is Agastaki, and this is gay feather. This flower stem has already finished blooming. The interesting thing about this is that it starts blooming at the top and then continues to bloom on down to the bottom. Flowers can also be arranged in big domed clusters. This is the example of the Joe Pye again. And they can be in sprays like this. This is the dried flower of oak leaf hydrangea. This is a great example of how you can have both sterile flowers and fertile flowers on the same stem. The sterile flowers don't have the anthers and the pistils. These are the fertile flowers here. Now, one final comment I'd like to make is that the different shapes of the flowers, the arrangements of the flowers, is going to attract different types of pollinators. The pollinators are going to bypass these sterile flowers that we think of as the actual showy flowers, and they're going to go for those fertile flowers inside. Pollinators love to land on the domed cluster of flowers of the Joe Pyes. That's a perfect landing place for butterflies. And some of the smaller bees can land on these delicate flowers here. The hibiscus, of course, is very open and easy for pollinators to visit. Small bees can tuck themselves inside these lipped flowers. This is hoary skullcap. The composite flowers also have a great landing pad with the disc flowers very open and for easy access. And tubular flowers like this are attractive to hummingbirds. So let's put everything we've been talking about together, and we'll use this particular plant as an example of a plant that you might want to identify. The first thing you'll want to do with any plant is to take a photograph to show its relative scale. I've already taken a photograph with my husband standing in front of it, and he's about 6 feet tall, so that would allow you to know that the height of the plant is about 8 to 9 feet. Plants, you might want to use a ruler, a hand, or even a coin to show the total size of the plant or the relative size of different parts of the plant. So looking more closely, let's say I want to get ready to take some detailed photos. First of all, we've determined that this can't be a woody plant. It doesn't have bark. It's an herbaceous plant. Second, I want to show that the stems are actually square. Looking at the leaves, I would say that they're more or less triangular in shape, and they're very rough textured. The flowers are examples of the composite flowers. They have the inner disc flowers and the outer ray flowers. So we'll zero in and get a picture of that. Now, some of the flowers have been pollinated by my multiple pollinator visitors, and you can see the seeds. Some of them are green and some of them are drying and brown. So we would want to take a close-up of that. So what you could do would be, if you wanted to have this particular plant identified, send the information, the description as best you can do. Herbaceous plant with thick square stems, rough, large, triangular shaped leaves. And one other thing I should have pointed out about the leaves is that they are clasped around the stems. So you would definitely want to show that, clasped around the stems. And they actually create a little indentation that can collect water. You would want to describe that it's a composite flower that's yellow, lighter yellow for the rays and darker yellow for the central disc flowers, and then show and describe the fruit. And I'm pretty confident that if you were to send that description and these detailed photos to the Master Gardener Help Desk, that they would identify this plant as cup plant, Silphium perfoliatum. I hope this tour of my garden, pointing out different characteristics and maybe some different techniques for photography, will be helpful when you send your mystery plant photos and descriptions to the Master Gardener Help Desk.